He'll never amount to anything in that field. Tech startups are for dreamers who can't handle real business. Those words from my father-in-law, Richard Bennett, still echo in my mind whenever I walk into my office. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Daniel Carter, 35 years old, and for the past decade, I've been building a digital marketing agency from the ground up in Chicago, while enduring the constant judgment of my wife's father, a traditional businessman who built Bennett Manufacturing into a regional powerhouse in the Midwest. I met Sarah during my senior year at Northwestern. I was studying computer science with a focus on digital marketing analytics, a field that was just emerging as companies began to realize the power of data-driven customer acquisition. Sarah was in business administration, following in her father's footsteps. We were paired for a cross-disciplinary project, her business plan, my digital strategy. We clicked immediately. Sarah's family was well known in Chicago business circles. The Bennetts had built their manufacturing company over 3 generations, specializing in industrial equipment parts that weren't glamorous but were essential to hundreds of factories across the Midwest. When Sarah first brought me home to meet her parents, I was intimidated. Their Lake Forest home was practically a mansion with a 3-car garage housing Richard's collection of vintage Cadillacs. Richard Bennett was imposing, 6'2" with silver hair and the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His handshake was crushing, deliberate. "So, Sarah tells me you're into computers," he said, "making computers sound like a child's hobby rather than a career path." I explained my vision for data-driven marketing, how digital transformations were changing business landscapes. He nodded politely, but his eyes had already moved on to something more interesting. That first dinner set the tone for our relationship. When I talked about starting my own agency after graduation, instead of joining an established firm, Richard laughed. "Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur these days. Most fail within a year. Smart move would be getting experience at a real company." "First," Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. Despite his dismissal, I launched Carter Digital the week after graduation. Sarah supported me completely, taking a corporate job to keep us afloat while I hustled for clients. Our apartment doubled as my office, a card table, second-hand laptop, and boundless determination. My first clients were small businesses willing to take a chance on the new kid with innovative ideas. A family-owned restaurant, a boutique clothing store, and a local gym. What Richard didn't understand was that the digital marketing landscape was shifting dramatically. Traditional advertising was losing ground to targeted online campaigns that could measure real ROI. My small clients saw immediate results: increased foot traffic, higher conversion rates, better customer retention. Word spread. After our wedding a year later, Richard cornered me at the reception. "Daniel, I admire your persistence with this little startup of yours. When you're ready for a real opportunity, Bennett Manufacturing could use someone in marketing. Not this digital mumbo-jumbo, but actual marketing." He slipped his business card into my pocket like he was doing me a favor. Sarah witnessed the exchange from across the room, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. I doubled down on my business. Nights, weekends, I poured everything into Carter Digital. By our second anniversary, I had hired 2 employees and moved into a small office space in Wicker Park. We were specializing in e-commerce optimization and lead generation systems that could demonstrate clear ROI. Our client list was growing steadily, and I was reinvesting every dollar of profit back into the company. Sunday dinners at the Bennett household became a predictable exercise in restraint. Richard would inevitably steer the conversation toward my little internet business, as he called it. "How many people does Facebook employ now?" "Thousands." "And how many at Carter Digital?" 4, 5. His comparisons were always designed to diminish my achievements. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, would try to change the subject, while Sarah would highlight our recent client wins. Richard would nod dismissively. During one particularly tense dinner, Richard announced that Bennett Manufacturing had landed a major contract with an automotive supplier. That's the kind of business that builds generational wealth, Daniel, not chasing trends online. I swallowed my retort along with my pot roast, reminding myself that this was Sarah's father, regardless of his opinion of me. What Richard failed to see was that while Bennett Manufacturing was still operating on business principles from the 1980s, the world had changed. Their sales process was entirely relationship-based, relying on industry connections Richard had cultivated over decades. Their marketing consisted of trade show appearances and the occasional print ad in industry publications. Their website looked like it had been designed in the early 2000s and rarely updated. After 5 years, Carter Digital had grown to 15 employees. We had moved to a larger office in the West Loop and specialized in comprehensive digital transformation for mid-sized businesses. Our client roster included several nationally recognized brands, and we'd won industry awards for our innovative campaigns. I had stopped attending the Bennett Sunday dinners as frequently, citing work commitments. The truth was, I couldn't stomach Richard's condescension anymore. Sarah understood. He's from a different era, she would say. He measures success by different metrics. I knew she was caught in the middle, torn between defending me and respecting her father. She had joined a management consulting firm after getting her MBA and was thriving in her own career, thankfully independent from her father's company. The first signs of trouble at Bennett Manufacturing appeared in industry publications. They had lost several key accounts to overseas competitors who offered similar quality at lower prices. Richard dismissed these setbacks publicly as temporary, blaming unfair trade practices rather than examining his company's failure to adapt. Privately, Sarah heard from her mother that Richard was becoming increasingly irritable, working longer hours to personally woo back lost clients. Meanwhile, Carter Digital was evolving. We had developed proprietary software that could predict consumer behavior based on thousands of data points, allowing our clients to personalize marketing efforts with unprecedented precision. Our revenue had crossed the 8-figure mark, and we had opened a second office in Austin. I had a team of 60 people now, including developers, data scientists, and marketing strategists from top firms. At a charity gala where both our families had tables, Richard approached me at the bar. He looked older, the confidence in his posture somewhat diminished. "I hear your company is doing well," he said, surprisingly without his usual dismissive tone. "Sarah says you've got some big clients now." "We're growing steadily," I replied, cautious about his sudden interest. "You know, Bennett Manufacturing has been slow to adapt to this digital nonsense. Maybe we should talk about your company. Handling our online presence." The offer was delivered casually, as if he were doing me a favor. "I'm happy to recommend some agencies that specialize in manufacturing clients," I replied. "We're actually at capacity right now with our current roster." The slight widening of his eyes told me he hadn't expected rejection. He hadn't considered that his son-in-law's little internet business might be too successful to need his patronage. The conversation was interrupted by the start of the dinner program, but I caught Sarah watching us from across the room. Later, that night, she confessed that Bennett Manufacturing was in more trouble than Richard had let on. They've lost 40% of their clients in the last 2 years. Dad's dipping into his personal savings to meet payroll. Has he considered modernizing their operations, digitizing their sales process? They're still doing everything the same way they did 20 years ago, I said. "You know, Dad, he believes what worked before will work again if he just pushes harder." I recognized the pattern. It was the same stubborn adherence to outdated methods that I had seen in many companies that eventually became our clients, usually after a painful wake-up call. But those companies had leadership willing to embrace change before it was too late. 6 months later, the business pages of the Chicago Tribune featured a small article. Bennett Manufacturing seeking restructuring amid financial difficulties. I read it over coffee, feeling a complex mix of vindication and concern, not for Richard, but for the employees whose livelihoods were at stake because of his refusal to adapt. Sarah was devastated. Dad's not handling it well. He's blaming everyone. The economy, foreign competition, disloyal clients. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Everyone except his own unwillingness to change. She had offered to help, to introduce him to business consultants who specialized in company turnarounds, but Richard had shut her down. He told me this was real business, that I wouldn't understand. Over the next few months, Bennett Manufacturing's decline accelerated. They closed one of their 2 facilities, laid off nearly half their workforce, and were rumored to be seeking a buyer. Richard stopped attending industry events and withdrew from his usual social circles. Sunday family dinners became tense affairs, focused on Eleanor's attempts to maintain normalcy, while Richard drank too much and made bitter remarks about business loyalty. During this period, Carter Digital was approached by Meridian Capital, a private equity firm looking to diversify their portfolio with digital marketing assets. After weeks of negotiations, I agreed to sell a minority stake in the company, providing an 8-figure infusion of capital while retaining control. The partnership would allow us to expand nationally and develop new technology platforms I had been conceptualizing. The news made the business sections of several national publications. Sarah showed me the Wall Street Journal article over breakfast. Carter Digital secures major investment. Founder retains control. She was beaming with pride. "Have you told your parents?" she asked. "I called them last night. They're thrilled. Dad's telling everyone his son is in the Wall Street Journal." My parents, a high school teacher and a nurse from Central Illinois, had always supported my entrepreneurial dreams, even when they didn't fully understand the digital world I operated in. "What about your dad?" I asked cautiously. Sarah's expression clouded. "I mentioned it. He changed the subject." 3 weeks later, the news broke. Bennett Manufacturing had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Their assets would be auctioned to satisfy creditors. The company that had been in the Bennett family for 3 generations was effectively finished. Sarah was heartbroken, not for the business itself, but for what this meant to her father's identity. Richard Bennett was Bennett Manufacturing in his mind. Without it, who was he? I sat in my office that evening, staring at the bankruptcy filing on my computer screen. Bennett Manufacturing had good bones, a loyal workforce, specialized equipment, and client relationships that could potentially be salvaged. Their failure wasn't in their product, it was in their inability to adapt to modern business practices. With the right leadership and a digital transformation, the core business could be viable again. The idea formed gradually. I discussed it with our CFO, our board, and finally with Meridian Capital. They were intrigued by the diversification opportunity and the potential synergies with our existing clients in adjacent industries. After extensive due diligence and financial modeling, we decided to move forward. Meridian Capital, with Carter Digital as a strategic partner, submitted a bid for Bennett Manufacturing's assets. Our offer wasn't the highest in pure dollars, but our commitment to retaining the remaining workforce and honoring existing client contracts made it attractive to the bankruptcy trustee and the judge overseeing the case. I didn't tell Sarah about our involvement until the deal was approved. I wanted to be certain before getting her hopes up about saving her family's legacy. "You bought my father's company?" she asked incredulously when I finally told her. "Why would you do that after how he's treated you for years?" I didn't buy it to spite him, if that's what you're asking, I explained. I bought it because with the right modernization strategy, it can be profitable again. The workforce is skilled, the equipment is specialized, and there's still a market for their products if they're properly positioned and marketed. Sarah studied my face, looking for hidden motivations. And what happens to my father in this scenario? That depends on him, I said honestly. He knows the industry and the clients better than anyone. If he's willing to adapt, there could be a role for him as an advisor, but he won't be running things the old way anymore. The meeting was set at the former Bennett Manufacturing headquarters, now temporarily under management by the Bankruptcy trustee. Richard arrived early, according to the receptionist, who had worked there for 20 years and who now gave me a curious look as I walked in. I had visited these offices exactly twice before, once when Sarah had forgotten something and needed to stop by, and once for the company holiday party years ago. Richard had given me a perfunctory tour then, explaining manufacturing concepts as if speaking to a child. The conference room had the dated feel of a space last renovated in the late 1990s, heavy wooden furniture, faded motivational posters, and an American flag in the corner. Richard was standing at the window when I entered, looking out at the manufacturing floor that was operating at minimal capacity to fulfill existing orders during the bankruptcy process. He turned when the door opened, his expression shifting from expectation to confusion to realization. You. The single word carried disbelief and the beginning of anger. Hello, Richard. Thank you for coming. I took a seat at the head of the table, the position Richard had always occupied in this room. I was told I was meeting with the new owners. His voice was tight, controlled. You are. Please, sit down. I gestured to the chair to my right. He remained standing. This is some kind of joke or revenge. I opened my portfolio and removed the acquisition documents. This isn't about revenge, Richard. Meridian Capital, in partnership with Carter Digital, has acquired the assets of Bennett Manufacturing through the bankruptcy process. We believe that with the right strategy, this company can be viable again. Richard's face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, disbelief, and finally a defeated resignation as he slowly lowered himself into the chair. So you've come to gloat. I've come to discuss the future of Bennett Manufacturing, I corrected. Him. The company needs a complete digital transformation, modernized operations, data-driven sales processes, and a strong online presence. The products themselves are excellent. It's the business model that failed. Richard stared at the tabletop, his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. And why exactly am I here? To hand over the keys? You're here because despite our differences, you know this industry and these clients better than anyone. The new Bennett Manufacturing could benefit from that knowledge if you're willing to work within a new framework. His head snapped up. You're offering me a job at my own company. I'm offering you a role as an industry advisor, with the possibility of more depending on how we work together. The company isn't yours anymore, Richard. That decision was made when you chose bankruptcy over adaptation. The harshness of this reality seemed to physically impact him. Richard Bennett, always the largest presence in any room, suddenly looked smaller. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed his age. And if I refuse? Then we thank you for your time and move forward without your input. We've already retained most of the key operational staff, but we'd prefer to have your industry expertise during the transition. Richard was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual commanding tone. What exactly would this role entail? I outlined the position. A 6-month advisory contract with the potential for extension, focusing on client relationships and industry knowledge transfer. He would report to the new operations director, a seasoned manufacturing executive we had recruited from a successfully digitized competitor. Throughout my explanation, Richard's expression remained unreadable. When I finished, he asked only one question: why? After all the ways I dismissed you and your business, why would you do this? I considered my answer carefully, partly because this company employs people who deserve a chance to succeed with the right leadership, partly because Sarah cares about her family's legacy, even if that legacy needs to evolve, and partly because I've spent my career helping businesses adapt to the digital age. Bennett Manufacturing is just another company that needs to transform or die. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes finally meeting mine. And you're the one who decides which it will be. The market already decided, Richard. I'm just providing an alternative to complete dissolution. He stood abruptly. I need time to think about this. Of course. We'll need your decision by Friday. I handed him a folder containing the contract details. The offer is fair, Richard, more than fair, considering the circumstances. He took the folder without looking at it. This company was built by my father and his father before him, and now it has a chance to continue, though not in the same form. Evolution isn't just for technology companies, Richard. It's for any business that wants to survive. After Richard left, I remained in the conference room, looking at the family photos on the wall. 3 generations of Bennett men standing proudly in front of the factory. Soon, those photos would be archived, replaced by images reflecting the company's new direction. But the Bennett name would remain, a nod to its heritage even as it transformed. Sarah was waiting anxiously when I got home. How did it go with Dad? About as expected. He's shocked, angry, humbled. I offered him an advisory role. She raised her eyebrows. Will he take it? I don't know. It would mean accepting that his way of doing business is over. That's a difficult pill for someone like your father to swallow. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You know, when I was growing up, Dad was my hero. Bennett Manufacturing was his kingdom, and he ruled it absolutely. I never imagined it could fall, or that you would be the one to catch it. I didn't do this to prove a point to him, Sarah. Maybe not consciously, she said with a small smile, but you have to admit there's a certain poetic justice to it all. Richard called 2 days later, not me, but Sarah. They spoke for over an hour. When she hung up, her expression was thoughtful. He's taking the advisory role, she said. He says he wants to preserve what can be saved of the company for the employees' sake. Did he mention working with me? He said, and I'm quoting, "Your husband may understand this digital world better than I do. Perhaps it's time I listened." She shook her head in amazement. I never thought I'd hear those words from him. The transformation of Bennett Manufacturing began immediately. We integrated digital systems to track production efficiency, implemented data-driven inventory management, and completely overhauled their sales and marketing approach. The website was rebuilt as a lead generation engine with detailed product, information, and case studies. We established an e-commerce portal for replacement parts, opening up a new revenue stream that had been previously neglected. Richard struggled initially with his diminished role, but gradually became a valuable resource. His deep knowledge of the industry, combined with our digital expertise, created a powerful synergy. In client meetings, I would defer to him on technical, product questions, and he began, somewhat reluctantly at first, to defer to me on digital strategy. 3 months into the transformation, we landed a major contract with a national client that had previously deemed Bennett Manufacturing too outdated to consider. Richard sat beside me in that pitch meeting, watching as I presented our digital capabilities, and then smoothly transitioned to him for the manufacturing expertise. When the client signed, Richard extended his hand to me without a word. It was the first genuine handshake we had ever exchanged. 6 months in, Bennett Manufacturing was operating profitably again. We had rehired many of the laid-off workers and were expanding into new market segments identified through data analysis. The advisory board, which now included Richard as a permanent member, approved a 5-year growth strategy that would double the company's size through a combination of digital innovation and strategic acquisitions. On the 1-year anniversary of our acquisition, we held a company celebration at the renovated factory. The workforce had grown from the post-bankruptcy low of 75 to nearly 200, with an additional technology division housed in modern offices attached to the manufacturing facility. Richard stood somewhat awkwardly at the event, accepting congratulations from employees and clients alike. I found him alone later, looking at the new digital production monitoring screens that displayed real-time data from the factory floor. "Impressive, isn't it?" I said, nodding toward the screens. "We can predict maintenance needs before equipment fails, optimize production schedules based on real-time demand, and trace any quality issue to its source immediately." Richard nodded. "I spent 30 years running this place by gut instinct and experience. Never thought we needed all this." He gestured at the monitors. "Until we did." "The best businesses combine experience with innovation," I replied. "We couldn't have saved Bennett Manufacturing without your industry knowledge." He turned to face me fully. "Let's be honest, Daniel. You didn't need me. You could have hired any number of industry consultants. You brought me in because of Sarah." "Partly," I acknowledged, "but also because I recognized something in you that I've seen in other successful leaders who've fallen behind, the capacity to adapt when finally faced with no alternative." Richard laughed, a short, gruff sound, a polite way of saying I learned my lesson. "Did you?" He was quiet for a moment, watching the data flow across the screens. "You know, when Sarah first brought you home, I saw a kid with big ideas and no substance. In my generation, you worked for an established company, paid your dues, maybe eventually started something traditional if you were exceptional. What you were doing, this digital marketing, data analytics, it seemed insubstantial, not real business. And now I'm watching my family's company thrive under the direction of the very approach I dismissed." And Richard extended his hand. "I was wrong about you, Daniel, about your business, about the future." I shook his hand firmly. "The future's always arriving, Richard. The trick is recognizing it before it runs you over." Later that evening, Sarah and I stood in the parking lot watching the last employees leave the celebration. The Bennett Manufacturing sign now included a modern logo and the tagline, "Traditional Quality Digital Innovation." "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, leaning against me. "When my father was belittling your career choices at all those Sunday dinners, did you ever picture owning his company?" "Honestly, no. I was focused on building something meaningful, not proving him wrong. The validation is just a side effect." "A pretty satisfying side effect," she said with a smile. "The most satisfying part isn't purchasing the company in bankruptcy," I replied. "It's seeing that what I've been building all these years has real value, enough value to save a traditional business that refused to change until it had no choice." As we drove home, I thought about the journey, from that card table in our first apartment to transforming a 3-generation manufacturing company. Success wasn't about proving Richard wrong. It was about being right about where the business world was heading and having the courage to pursue that vision despite skepticism. Richard had built his company in an era when stability and tradition were the foundations of success. I had built mine in an age where adaptation and innovation determined survival. Both approaches had value in their time. The real lesson was learning to recognize when your time had passed and having the wisdom to embrace the change you once resisted. The story of Carter Digital and Bennett Manufacturing would become a case study in business transformation. How digital innovation saved a traditional manufacturer from obsolescence. But for me, it would always be something more personal, a reminder that true validation comes not from proving critics wrong, but from creating something so undeniably valuable that even your harshest judge must eventually acknowledge its worth. The success of Carter Digital's first year should have silenced Richard's criticism, but instead it only changed its form. At Sarah's birthday dinner at an upscale steakhouse downtown, Richard raised his glass in a toast. To my beautiful daughter, who's making waves at Anderson Consulting, and to Daniel, who's managed to keep his little website business afloat for a whole year. The table laughed politely, but Sarah squeezed my knee under the table. We both knew what little website business meant in Richard's vocabulary, a dismissal wrapped in congratulations. The truth was that Carter Digital had not only survived, but thrived. We had expanded to 8 full-time employees and moved into proper office space in Chicago's emerging tech corridor. Our client list had grown to include 2 regional restaurant chains and a mid-sized retail company expanding their e-commerce presence. Our revenue had tripled from our projections, and I had started paying myself a reasonable salary instead of reinvesting every penny. Richard's backhanded compliments became a regular feature of family gatherings. Daniel's playing with his internet, in toys, while real businesses are making things, he'd say to his golf buddies at the country club when we were invited for summer events. Or he'd introduce me to his business associates as my son-in-law who helps companies with their Facebook pages. Each time I'd correct him politely. We actually develop comprehensive digital marketing strategies and implement data analytics systems. And each time, he'd wave away the explanation as if I was speaking a foreign language. Sarah would apologize later, in private. He's from a different generation, he just doesn't understand what you do. But we both knew it was more than a generational gap. Richard Bennett fundamentally believed that traditional industries, manufacturing, construction, transportation, were the backbone of the economy, and everything else was peripheral, or worse, ephemeral. The fact that his daughter had married someone in this ephemeral business personally offended him. The tension came to a head at Thanksgiving dinner in our 3rd year of marriage. Bennett Manufacturing had just completed its most profitable quarter to date, and Richard was in high spirits, regaling the table with stories of the new contract they'd secured with an automotive parts company. $30 million over 5 years, he announced proudly, swirling his bourbon. That's the kind of deal that builds legacies. His eyes flicked to me. How are things at the website shop, Daniel? Still helping people with their internet advertising? Something in me snapped. After 3 years of diminishing comments, I'd had enough. Actually, Richard, we just signed our first 7-figure client contract last month. A national retail chain that's shifting their advertising budget from traditional media to digital because they can measure actual returns instead of guessing. The table went quiet. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, looked between us nervously. Sarah's brother Michael, who worked in his father's company, suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. Richard's smile remained fixed, but his eyes narrowed slightly. $1 million to make some banner ads. The world's gone mad. He chuckled, looking around the table for support, but no one joined in. It's not for banner ads, I replied evenly. It's for a complete digital transformation of their customer acquisition strategy. We're building predictive models based on customer behavior data that will increase their conversion rates by an estimated 30%. Richard took a long sip of his bourbon. Well, good for you, playing with all those fancy numbers. Meanwhile, Bennett Manufacturing will be producing actual physical parts that go into actual vehicles driven by actual people. He emphasized actual each time, the implication clear. My work wasn't real, wasn't tangible, wasn't valuable. Sarah changed the subject quickly, asking her mother about plans for Christmas, but the damage was done. The divide between Richard's world and mine had been laid bare at the family dinner table. In his eyes, I would always be the son-in-law who chose a frivolous career over real work. After dinner, as Sarah and I drove home in tense silence, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry about Dad. He was way out of line." "It's fine," I replied automatically, though we both knew it wasn't. "No, it's not," she insisted. "Your company is doing amazing things. The work you're doing is reshaping how businesses connect with customers. Dad's stuck in the past, and he refuses to see that the future belongs to companies that adapt." Her support meant everything, but Richard's dismissal still stung. I had hoped that success would eventually earn his respect, but it was becoming clear that no level of achievement in my field would ever measure up in his eyes. The irony was that while Richard belittled digital transformation, Bennett Manufacturing was falling behind its competitors in exactly this area. During a rare civil conversation at a family gathering, Michael confided that they were losing smaller orders to competitors with more streamlined online ordering systems. "Dad doesn't want to invest in updating our website or implementing an online portal," Michael explained, keeping his voice low. "Says it's a waste of money when our sales team has perfectly good relationships with purchasing managers." He looked troubled. "But those purchasing managers are retiring, and the younger replacements want to place orders online at 11 p.m., not wait to call our sales guy at 9 a.m. I offered to provide some informal consulting to help them understand what a digital transition might look like for their business model. Michael seemed interested but doubtful. "Dad would never go for it, especially not if the ideas came from you." His candor was refreshing, if painful. "Because I'm in digital marketing." Michael gave me a sympathetic look. "Partly that. Partly because you married his only daughter without asking for his blessing first." This was news to me. Sarah never mentioned that was expected. She probably didn't think it mattered. She's always been independent. But Dad's old school that way. Michael shrugged. Plus, he had his heart set on her marrying Jason Keller. "The lawyer?" I vaguely remembered Sarah mentioning an ex-boyfriend who worked at a prestigious Chicago law firm. "His father's on the board at Bennett. Dad had it all planned out. Merge. The families keep everything in the business circle. Then Sarah brought home a tech guy." He grinned. No offense. Suddenly, Richard's persistent coldness made more sense. I wasn't just in the wrong industry. I had derailed his personal and professional plans for his daughter. This wasn't just about digital versus traditional business. It was about control. As Carter Digital continued to grow, expanding to 25 employees and opening a second office in Minneapolis, Richard's dismissal of my career became more pointed. When we purchased our first home in Lincoln Park, a renovated 3-bedroom that stretched our budget but represented a significant milestone for us, Richard's response was telling. "Nice starter home," he commented during the housewarming party, emphasizing starter as he looked around our living room. "When you're ready to move to the North Shore, let me know. I have connections with some excellent realtors who can find you a proper house." The implication was clear. Our achievement wasn't really an achievement at all in his eyes, just a stepping stone to what he considered real success. Sarah had been offered a partnership track at her consulting firm, and between our two careers, we were doing exceptionally well for a couple in their early 30s. But in Richard's world, success had a very specific geography and aesthetic, and our urban professional lifestyle didn't qualify. The undercurrent of tension affected Sarah more than she admitted. I'd occasionally find her scrolling through Bennett Manufacturing's outdated website, frowning at the clunky interface and limited functionality. "They're falling behind," she'd murmur, more to herself than to me. Dad refuses to see it, but they're being left in the dust. She was right. Industry publications that I now monitored regularly showed that Bennett's competitors were investing heavily in digital infrastructure, online ordering systems, inventory management software, automated customer service platforms. Bennett Manufacturing remained stubbornly analog, relying on their reputation and long-standing relationships to maintain their market position. In our 5th year of marriage, at the annual Bennett Christmas party held at their country club, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my concerns. 2 men I recognized as board members were speaking quietly in a corner, cocktails in hand. "Richard needs to wake up and smell the digital coffee," one said. "Hartman Industries just launched that new client portal and took the Westfield contract right out from under us." "Good luck telling him that," the other replied. "I suggested updating our online presence at the last board meeting, and he went on a 10-minute rant about flash-in-the-pan tech trends. The man still has his secretary print out his emails. I moved away before they noticed me eavesdropping, but the exchange stayed with me." Bennett Manufacturing wasn't just resistant to change, its leadership was actively hostile to it. The rapidly evolving manufacturing landscape that wasn't just old-fashioned, it was dangerous. Meanwhile, Carter Digital was experiencing growing pains of its own. Our rapid expansion had created organizational challenges, and I was working 16-hour days trying to manage client relationships while building internal systems to handle our growth. Sarah and I were like ships passing in the night, both consumed by our careers, communicating via text messages and quick conversations over coffee in the morning. The breaking point came after a particularly grueling week when I had to cancel our anniversary dinner because a major client was threatening to pull their business over a mishandled campaign launch. I was in the office until 2 a.m. with my team, salvaging the relationship and fixing the issues. When I crawled into bed, Sarah was already asleep, or pretending to be. The next morning, she confronted me over breakfast. "We need to talk about where this is going, Daniel." My stomach dropped. In my sleep-deprived state, I immediately assumed the worst. What is going? Us?" She looked startled. "No, God, no. I meant your company. It's consuming you. You're doing everything yourself, trying to control every aspect of every project. It's not sustainable." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. "I know. We're growing too fast to keep up with the organizational structure. I need to delegate more, build out the management team." "Then do it," she said firmly. "Hire people you trust, train them properly, let them take some of the burden." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm proud of what you've built, but I miss my husband." That conversation was the push I needed. Over the next 6 months, I restructured Carter Digital, hiring experienced managers to lead each department, implementing proper processes and systems, and forcing myself to step back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic direction. The company didn't just survive this transition, it thrived. With a stronger organizational foundation, we were able to take on larger clients and more complex projects. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You look 10 years younger," she commented one evening, as we actually managed to cook dinner together, "for the first time in months, and you haven't checked your phone in at least an hour." "New rule," I explained, "no phone during personal time unless it's a genuine emergency. The company won't collapse if I'm not available 24/7. She raised her glass in a toast to delegation and boundaries. As Carter Digital stabilized under the new structure, I found myself with something I hadn't experienced in years: mental bandwidth to think beyond the next client deadline or staffing challenge. I began paying more attention to industry trends, both in digital marketing and in the sectors our clients operated in. Manufacturing was of particular interest. partly because of Bennett, but mostly because it represented an enormous untapped market for digital transformation services. Traditional manufacturers were struggling to adapt to the digital age. E-commerce was changing supply chains, customer expectations were evolving, and data analytics was revolutionizing production efficiency. The companies that embraced these changes were pulling ahead. Those that resisted were falling behind. I developed a specialized digital transformation package specifically for manufacturing clients, combining e-commerce solutions, data-driven inventory management, and digital marketing strategies tailored to B2B relationships. We tested it with a small manufacturing client in Wisconsin with remarkable results: 30% increase in order volume, 22% reduction in inventory costs, and significant improvements in customer satisfaction metrics. When I shared this case study at an industry conference, our booth was swarmed with manufacturing representatives eager to learn more. Within 3 months, we had signed contracts with 5 mid-sized manufacturers across the Midwest. Carter Digital was no longer just a marketing agency. We were becoming transformation consultants, helping traditional businesses navigate the digital revolution. The success of this new direction caught the attention of industry publications. Digital Manufacturing Today featured our approach in a cover story titled "Digital Transformation Not Just for Tech Companies Anymore." The article included interviews with our manufacturing clients and detailed the results they had achieved. By embracing digital tools and strategies, I sent a copy to Michael at Bennett Manufacturing with a note. Thought this might interest you. Happy to discuss if you want to learn more. He never responded, but Sarah mentioned that she had seen the magazine on his desk during a visit to her parents' home. At the next Bennett family gathering, a 4th of July barbecue at Richard and Eleanor's Lake Forest estate, I steeled myself for the usual barrage of dismissive comments. But Richard's approach had shifted slightly. Instead of belittling what I did, he simply avoided discussing business altogether, steering conversations towards safe topics like golf and local politics. It was Eleanor who brought up the article, perhaps innocently, perhaps deliberately. "I saw your picture in that magazine, Daniel. Very impressive. All those numbers and results." Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, becoming suddenly very interested in adjusting the flame on his massive stainless steel grill. "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied. "We're helping a lot of traditional manufacturers modernize their operations. The results have been remarkable." "Remarkable," Richard muttered, flipping a burger with unnecessary force. "Remarkable is keeping a company profitable for 3 generations without chasing every trend that comes along." And there it was, the real issue. Richard didn't just dismiss digital transformation as unimportant. He viewed it as a direct threat to his legacy and his way of doing business. Acknowledging its value would mean admitting that his approach might be becoming obsolete. Later that afternoon, as guests mingled around the pool, Michael pulled me aside. "That Wisconsin company in your case study, their numbers are real. The 30% increase in orders? Completely real," I confirmed. "We have the before and after data to prove it. And they're not alone. Every manufacturer we've worked with has seen significant improvements." He glanced toward his father, who was holding court near the bar, regaling his golf buddies with some story or other. "We lost the Peterson contract last month. They went with Hartman Industries because of their online ordering system and inventory integration." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Despite Richard's attitude toward me, I didn't want to see a family business struggle. "Dad says it's a temporary setback, that Peterson will come back when they realize the importance of personal relationships." Michael's expression made it clear he didn't share his father's confidence. "But I've talked to their new purchasing director. She's 32 and doesn't care about playing golf with sales reps. She wants efficiency and data." I nodded, understanding completely. That's the future, Michael. The next generation of B2B customers expects digital tools and data-driven relationships. Personal connections still matter, but they're not enough anymore. He hesitated, then asked the question I could see had been on his mind. How much would it cost for Bennett to implement something like what you did for that Wisconsin company? It depends on the specifics of your operations and goals, but ballpark, for a company your size, probably $750,000 to $1, $2 million for the complete transformation, including all the technology, training, and support. I could see him wince at the number. But the ROI typically happens within 12 to 18 months, and that's conservative based on our data. Michael nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Maybe try to approach Dad again about updating our systems. He didn't sound hopeful. As Sarah and I drove home that evening, I shared my conversation with Michael. She sighed heavily. Dad won't. Go for it. He sees digital anything as a fad, not a fundamental shift in how business works, and he'd rather burn the company to the ground than take advice from you. That harsh. Maybe worse, she admitted. I love my father, but he's the most stubborn man I've ever known, and he's got this bizarre blind spot when it comes to you and your work. It's like admitting you're successful would somehow diminish him. Her assessment was accurate. Over the next year, as Carter Digital's manufacturing vertical grew exponentially, Bennett Manufacturing began losing more contracts to more technologically advanced competitors. The industry was transforming rapidly, and Bennett was standing still, or worse, actively resisting the change. At Sunday dinners, which we now attended more out of obligation than pleasure, Richard's dismissal of my career had evolved into a broader dismissal of all things digital. These companies think a fancy website will replace quality and relationships, he would declare. They'll learn the hard way when their customers realize they need real expertise, not online gimmicks. The more Bennett Manufacturing struggled, the more vehement Richard became in his rejection of digital transformation. It was as if admitting the need for change would mean conceding that I had been right all along, something his pride simply wouldn't allow. The tension reached a breaking point at Thanksgiving dinner in our 6th year of marriage. Bennett Manufacturing had just lost another major contract, this one to a younger, more agile competitor that offered real-time production tracking and integrated supply chain management. Richard had been drinking heavily before dinner even began, his face flushed and his movements increasingly uncoordinated. As we gathered around the dining table, laden with Eleanor's traditional spread, Richard raised his glass in what started as a toast, but quickly devolved into something else entirely. To family, he began, his voice slightly slurred, to building something real, something tangible that lasts generations. His gaze fixed on me across the table. Not digital smoke and mirrors that'll be obsolete next year when some new internet fad comes along. Sarah stiffened beside me. Eleanor placed a hand on Richard's arm. Richard, perhaps we should just enjoy our dinner. He shook her off. No, Eleanor, I think it's time we had some honesty at this table. Bennett Manufacturing has stood for quality and craftsmanship for 3 generations. We make real things that people use. We employ real people who build real products. Each real was emphasized with a slight jabbing motion of his glass, sending ripples of red wine dangerously close to the rim. Dad, Sarah warned, her voice tight. While other companies chase trends and gimmicks, Richard continued, as if she hadn't spoken, we maintain traditions of excellence. That's worth something. That has value. His eyes, slightly unfocused, remained fixed on me. Unlike helping companies trick people into buying things they don't need with your digital hocus-pocus. The table fell silent. Michael looked at his plate. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, her expression pained. I had endured years of Richard's dismissal and condescension, always taking the high road, always respecting him as Sarah's father, even when he showed me no respect in return. But in that moment, watching him drunkenly dismiss not just my career, but the entire digital transformation that was reshaping global business, something in me refused to remain silent. "Digital transformation isn't a trick or a gimmick, Richard," I said quietly. "It's the future of business, all business, including manufacturing. The companies that adapt will thrive. Those that don't will disappear." Richard's face darkened. "Is that a threat?" "It's reality," I replied. "Bennett Manufacturing has lost 4 major contracts in the past year to competitors with better technology integration. Your market share has declined 23% while operating. Costs have increased. These aren't opinions, they're facts." "You don't know anything about my business," he snapped. "I know that Hartman Industries implemented a digital transformation program 18 months ago and has since increased their market share by 31%. I know that Midwest Fabrication launched an online ordering portal with real-time inventory status and landed the Peterson contract that Bennett had held for 20 years. Richard slammed his glass down, sloshing wine onto the white tablecloth. "Who the hell do you think you are, coming into my house and lecturing me about my own industry?" Sarah placed her hand on mine under the table, whether in support or to restrain me, I wasn't sure. But I had started this, and I needed to finish it. "I'm someone who has helped dozens of manufacturing companies successfully navigate digital transformation," I said, keeping my voice level. "Companies very similar to Bennett that were facing the exact challenges you're facing now. All of them have emerged stronger, more efficient, and more profitable." I paused. "I could help Bennett too if you'd let me." The offer hung in the air for a moment. Michael looked up, something like hope flashing across his face before Richard's response crushed it. "Help?" Richard laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You want to help by dismantling everything we've built and replacing it with your digital toys? Absolutely not. Bennett Manufacturing has succeeded for 3 generations without digital tricks, and it will continue to succeed without them." Sarah stood abruptly. "I think we should go." Eleanor looked stricken. "Sarah, please, it's Thanksgiving." "I'm not going to sit here and listen to Dad insult Daniel and his work yet again," Sarah replied, her voice shaking slightly. "We've endured it for years, and I'm done." Richard's expression was a mixture of anger and surprise, as if he hadn't expected his daughter to stand up to him. "Sarah, you're overreacting. We're having a business discussion." "No, Dad, we're not. You're drunkenly attacking my husband's career and expertise because you're too proud and stubborn to admit that the business world is changing and Bennett Manufacturing is being left behind." The rawness of her words seemed to penetrate Richard's anger. He blinked, momentarily at a loss. "I love you, Dad," Sarah continued more gently now, "and I respect what you've built. But your refusal to adapt isn't just hurting you. It's putting at risk everything your father and grandfather built. And it's hurting this family." With that, she turned and walked out of the dining room. After a moment's hesitation, I followed, leaving behind a tableau of stunned silence. As we drove home through the quiet North Shore streets, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lost my temper." "You were defending me," I said, "after years of his constant dismissal and disrespect." "It's not just about that anymore," she replied. "Bennett Manufacturing is in real trouble, and Dad refuses to see it. It's like watching someone drive toward a cliff while insisting they know exactly where they're going." Her assessment was painfully accurate. Richard Bennett's refusal to adapt wasn't just a personal quirk or a generational gap. It was becoming an existential threat to the company he claimed to cherish. The irony was that I genuinely could have helped Bennett navigate the transition to the digital age, bringing my expertise in digital transformation together with their manufacturing excellence. But Richard's pride and his inexplicable antagonism toward me and my career made such collaboration impossible. What neither of us knew that Thanksgiving night, as we drove home in tense silence, was that Bennett Manufacturing's decline was accelerating faster than anyone, except perhaps Michael, who saw the daily numbers, realized. The confrontation at the dinner table was just the prelude to a much more dramatic reckoning that would reshape not only Bennett Manufacturing, but our entire family dynamic. The storm clouds were gathering, and Richard Bennett's stubborn refusal to see them would soon have consequences none of us could have anticipated. The Thanksgiving confrontation created a rift in the Bennett family that persisted through the holiday season. Sarah and I declined the annual Christmas Eve gathering at Richard and Eleanor's home, opting instead for a quiet celebration in our Lincoln Park townhouse. Michael and his wife Lisa joined us, a silent acknowledgement that the family dynamics were shifting. Over glasses of mulled wine, Michael confided that things at Bennett Manufacturing had deteriorated further. "We'd lost the Ramirez contract last week," he said, his voice low, even though there was no one else to overhear. "They've been with us since Grandpa Bennett was running the company, 27 years. "What happened?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Same story. Their new operations director wants real-time production updates and inventory integration with their purchasing system. We couldn't offer it. Precision Tech could." He took a long drink. "Dad blamed the sales team, fired Jim Hargrove after 15 years with the company." Sarah looked stricken. "Jim's been at every company Christmas party since I was a kid. Caroline just started college." Michael nodded grimly. "Dad's looking for scapegoats instead of solutions. The board is getting restless. There was a closed-door meeting last week that Dad wasn't invited to. On that detail caught my attention. The board is meeting without the CEO? That's never a good sign." "They're worried. We all are." Michael hesitated, glancing at his wife, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. "I've been doing some research on my own, looking at what our competitors are implementing, what our clients are asking for. The kind of digital transformation you've been talking about, it's not optional anymore. It's survival." I leaned forward. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about putting together a proposal for the board. A digital transformation initiative for Bennett. Complete modernization of our systems, online client portal, inventory management, data analytics, the works." He met my eyes directly, "And I want to hire Carter Digital to lead it." The room went silent. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. "Michael, that would be—" I began. "Career suicide?" He finished with a grim smile. "Maybe. Probably. But I've looked at the projections. If we continue on our current path, Bennett Manufacturing won't exist in 3 years. The company my grandfather built, that my father expanded, that I was supposed to inherit someday, gone. I can't let that happen without trying everything possible to save it." "Dad would never approve it," Sarah said gently. "You know how he feels about digital transformation, about Daniel's company specifically." "I'm not planning to ask Dad," Michael replied, his jaw set in a way that reminded me suddenly of Richard. "I'm going directly to the board. If they approve it, Dad will be outvoted." The implications were enormous. Michael was essentially planning a palace coup, challenging his father's leadership and vision for the company he'd run for nearly 30 years. If it failed, his position at Bennett would be untenable. If it succeeded, the family dynamics would be forever altered. "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" I asked carefully. Michael looked at Lisa, who reached for his hand. "We've Discussed it extensively, she said. It's a risk, but staying silent while the company circles the drain isn't an option anymore. I'll need your help, Michael added. Financial projections, implementation timelines, case studies from similar manufacturers. The board will want detailed numbers and concrete examples. I nodded slowly. I'm happy to provide whatever information would be helpful, but if this goes forward, if the board approves it, you should consider multiple bids, not just from Carter Digital. It would look better. That's decent of you, Michael said, but Carter Digital has the best track record with manufacturing clients. I've done my homework. If we're going to do this, we should work with the best. The conversation shifted to logistics, what information Michael would need, the timeline for his presentation to the board, contingency plans if things didn't go as hoped. But beneath the practical planning lay a deeper, unspoken understanding. This was about more than saving Bennett Manufacturing. It was about challenging the rigid, outdated thinking that Richard had imposed on both his company and his family. For decades, as Michael and Lisa prepared to leave, he paused in our entryway. Don't mention any of this to Mom or Dad. Not until I've had a chance to present to the board. Of course, Sarah promised. But Michael, be careful. Dad's whole identity is wrapped up in Bennett Manufacturing and his way of running it. This won't just be a business disagreement to him. I know. His expression was a mixture of determination and regret. But sometimes the right thing and the easy thing aren't the same. After they left, Sarah and I sat in our living room, the Christmas tree lights casting a warm glow over the quiet space. Do you think the board will go for it? She asked. If they're already meeting without Richard, they're clearly concerned about the company's direction. Michael's proposal might be exactly what they're looking for, a way to modernize without completely ousting the Bennett family from leadership. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. And if they approve it, and if Dad finds out your company is involved, I finished her thought. It would confirm everything he's ever thought about me, that I'm trying to undermine him, change his company, turn his own son against him. Even though that's not what's happening at all, she said with a sigh. Michael came to you, not the other way around. Richard won't see it that way. He'll see conspiracy where there's only concern. The weeks following Christmas were tense. Michael worked feverishly on his proposal, sending me requests for information on implementation timelines, technology requirements, and financial projections. I provided everything he asked for, carefully navigating the ethical line between helping Sarah's brother save his family's company and actively pursuing Bennett Manufacturing as a client. January brought record snowfall to Chicago, and with it, more troubles for Bennett. A major client placed their order with a competitor after Bennett couldn't provide the digital integration their new system required. An attempt to manually reconcile inventory records resulted in a significant order being delayed by 3 weeks, costing the company a 6-figure penalty. The board's concern escalated to alarm. Michael secured his presentation slot for the February board meeting. 3 days before the scheduled date, my phone rang during dinner. Michael's name flashed on the screen. They moved up the meeting, he said without preamble, his voice tight with stress. It's tomorrow morning, not Friday. Dad's out of town at a manufacturing conference in Detroit, and the board chairman called an emergency session. Do you have everything ready? I asked. Almost. I'm finishing the slides now, but I'm worried about the technical questions. If they drill down into the implementation details, I might not have all the answers. I hesitated, sensing what was coming next. I need you there, Daniel, not to pitch Carter Digital, just to answer technical questions if they come up. As a consultant, not a vendor. It was a reasonable request under normal circumstances, but these circumstances were far from normal. My presence at the board meeting would fundamentally change the dynamics, especially if Richard somehow found out. Have you cleared this with the board chairman? I asked. Yes. He's actually the one who suggested it. He knows your reputation in digital transformation for manufacturing. He said having an expert available to answer questions would strengthen the presentation. I looked at Sarah, who'd been listening to my side of the conversation. She nodded slightly. "All right," I agreed. "What time?" 8 a.m. The chairman wants to wrap this up before Dad returns from Detroit tomorrow evening. The Bennett Manufacturing headquarters occupied a sprawling complex on the outskirts of Chicago, a combination of the original 1950s brick building and several more modern additions. I hadn't visited in years, not since the company holiday party early in my relationship with Sarah. Michael met me in the parking lot, his face drawn with tension. He wore a suit that seemed slightly too large for him, as if he'd lost weight. "Recently. Thanks for coming," he said, gripping my hand firmly. "The whole board is here. 9 members total, including Dad's seat, which will be empty. How are you feeling about this?" He managed a tight smile. "Like I'm either saving the family company or committing career suicide, possibly both." The boardroom was exactly as I'd imagined it. Heavy wooden furniture, leather chairs, framed photographs of the Bennett manufacturing facilities through the decades. 8 people sat around the massive table, most of them men in their 50s and 60s, with 2 younger women who I guessed were more recent appointments. Thomas Whitaker, the board chairman and a contemporary of Richard's, stood as we entered. "Michael, good morning, and you must be Daniel Carter. Thank you for joining us." His handshake was firm, his expression unreadable. I should clarify for everyone that Mr. Carter is here as a technical consultant to answer questions about digital transformation implementation, not as a vendor pitching services. The other board members nodded, and Michael began his presentation. He was remarkably thorough, outlining Bennett Manufacturing's declining market position, the technological advantages their competitors had developed, and the accelerating loss of clients to more digitally advanced manufacturers. "Bennett Manufacturing stands at a crossroads," he concluded after 30 minutes of detailed analysis. "We can continue on our current path and face almost certain decline, or we can embrace digital transformation and reclaim our market leadership. The investment is significant, $1, $5 million for the complete implementation, but the projected return is substantial." The room was silent for a moment. Then Whitaker spoke. "You've made a compelling case for change, Michael. But why now? Why not pursue this through normal channels with your father's involvement?" Michael straightened his shoulders. "With all due respect, sir, I have tried to discuss digital modernization with my father multiple times over the past 2 years. He has consistently dismissed these initiatives as unnecessary expenses and passing trends. Meanwhile, our competitors have implemented exactly these kinds of systems and are taking our market share because of it." An older board member, whose nameplate read James Hoffman, leaned forward. "Your father built this company into what it is today. He has decades of experience in this industry. What makes you think you know better?" "I don't claim to know manufacturing better than my father," Michael replied evenly. "But I do recognize that the business environment has changed fundamentally. Our clients are demanding digital integration that we can't provide. This isn't about knowing better, it's about adapting to current market realities." A younger woman whom I recognized as Alicia Chen, CEO of a successful tech company, spoke next. "I've been advocating for digital modernization since I joined this board 2 years ago. Richard has blocked every initiative. I support Michael's proposal, but I have concerns about implementation. Bennett has no internal digital expertise. How do we ensure this massive investment delivers results?" This was my cue. Michael looked at me and I nodded slightly. "If I may," I began, "implementing digital transformation in manufacturing environments is a specialized field. but one with established methodologies and proven results. The key is a phased approach that addresses immediate client needs first, then builds toward comprehensive integration. For the next 20 minutes, I answered increasingly technical questions about implementation timelines, required resources, expected disruptions to operations, and potential risks. The board's questions were pointed but fair, demonstrating a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of the challenges involved. As the discussion progressed, I could feel the room's energy shifting. The initial skepticism was giving way to cautious interest, particularly from the younger board members. Even Hoffman, who had been the most openly doubtful, was taking detailed notes. Finally, Whitaker called for a brief recess. "Michael, Mr. Carter, if you could step outside for a few minutes while the board discusses this proposal." In the hallway, Michael paced nervously while I leaned against the wall, mentally reviewing the discussion, identifying any weak points in our responses. "You did well in there," I told him. "Very thorough, very professional. Thanks to your data and case studies," he replied. "I couldn't have put this together without your help." He stopped pacing suddenly. "If they approve this, Dad will never forgive me." I didn't have a comforting response. He was right. Richard Bennett would view this as the ultimate betrayal, his son going behind his back to fundamentally change the company he'd spent his life building. After 15 tense minutes, the door opened, and Whitaker invited us back in. The board members' expressions gave nothing away. "We've had a productive discussion," Whitaker began once we were seated. "Michael, your presentation has raised important concerns about Bennett Manufacturing's current trajectory. The board agrees that digital modernization is necessary for the company's continued success." He paused. "However, we cannot approve such a significant initiative without the CEO's involvement." Michael's face fell, but Whitaker wasn't finished. "What we can approve is a comprehensive digital assessment of Bennett Manufacturing's current systems and client needs, with recommendations for modernization priorities. This assessment would be conducted by an independent digital transformation consultant, with findings presented to the full board, including your father, in 60 days. It wasn't the full implementation Michael had hoped for, but it was a crucial first step, getting expert eyes on Bennett's systems and official documentation of the problems and potential solutions. "The board has also agreed," Whitaker continued, "that this assessment should be led by a consultant with specific experience in manufacturing environments." His eyes shifted to me. "Mr. Carter, while we understand you're here today only as a technical resource, the board would like to know if Carter Digital would be interested in submitting a proposal for this assessment project." Michael looked at me, his expression mixture of hope and apology. We both knew what accepting this project would mean for my already strained relationship with Richard. "Carter Digital would be honored to submit a proposal," I replied carefully. "However, given my personal connection to the Bennett family, I would suggest the board consider multiple bids to ensure complete objectivity." Whitaker nodded approvingly. "A commendable suggestion. We'll solicit proposals from 3 firms with relevant expertise, including yours. The board will make the final selection based on qualifications and approach, not personal connections." He looked at Michael. "I believe your father returns from Detroit this evening." Michael nodded, his expression grim. "Then I'll inform him of the board's decision first thing tomorrow morning." Whitaker's tone softened slightly. "Michael, I've known your father for 30 years. He won't take this well initially, but Richard Bennett cares about this company above all else. If digital transformation is truly necessary for Bennett Manufacturing's survival, and I believe your presentation has made a compelling case that it is, he will eventually come to accept it." I wasn't nearly as confident in Richard's capacity for change, but I kept that opinion to myself. As we walked back to our cars after the meeting, Michael looked simultaneously relieved and terrified. "That went better than I expected," he said. "The assessment is a foot in the door." "It's a smart approach," I agreed. "Less confrontational than a complete overhaul, but it still moves the company in the right direction. Dad's going to be furious." Michael ran a hand through his hair. "Not just about the digital assessment, but about your involvement specifically." "I know. That's why I suggested multiple bids. If the board selects another firm, it might be easier for Richard to accept." Michael shook his head. "No other firm has your track record with manufacturing clients. If the board is serious about this, and I think they are, they'll select Carter Digital regardless of the family connection." He hesitated. "Actually, they might select Carter Digital because of the family connection." "What do you mean?" "Whitaker and some of the others. They're concerned about Dad's judgment lately. The way he's been running the company, ignoring market trends, firing people who disagree with him. They might see your involvement as a way to bring new thinking into Bennett without completely undermining Dad's position." It was a perceptive observation. The board was trying to navigate a delicate balance, modernizing the company without directly challenging the CEO who had led it for decades. Using his son-in-law's firm could be seen as keeping the changes within the extended family, a compromise of sorts. "Either way," Michael continued, "the storm hits tomorrow morning when Whitaker tells Dad about the board's decision. I'm not planning to be in the office." "Probably wise," I agreed. "Give him some time to process before you have to face him." "I should warn Lisa and the kids that Grandpa might be on the warpath for a while." We parted with a handshake that turned into a brief hug, two men united by concern for a family business and braced for the inevitable fallout of challenging its patriarch. When I arrived home that evening, Sarah was waiting anxiously. "How did it go?" she asked as soon as I walked through the door. I gave her the full rundown of the meeting, the board's decision to pursue a digital assessment, and their invitation for Carter Digital to bid on the project. "So they didn't approve the full transformation program, but they're moving in that direction," she summarized. "Exactly. It's a cautious first step, but an important one." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "Dad's going to be livid." "I know. Michael's avoiding the office tomorrow when Whitaker breaks the news." "Smart man." She sighed heavily. "This is going to make family gatherings even more uncomfortable, isn't it?" "Assuming we're still invited to family gatherings," I replied, only half joking. "Mom won't let Dad cut us off completely, even if he wants to." Sarah's expression was a mixture of sadness and determination. "But things will be different. Dad doesn't handle challenges to his authority well, especially not from family." The next 48 hours unfolded exactly as we'd anticipated. Michael texted late the following morning. "Dad just called. Never heard him so angry. Used words. I didn't know he knew. Said board betrayed him. I betrayed him. Hung up when I tried to explain." Sarah received a tearful call from her mother. Eleanor reported that Richard had come home from his meeting with Whitaker in a state of cold fury, packing a bag and announcing he was going to the lake house for a few days to think things through. When Eleanor had tried to discuss the situation, he'd shut her down completely. "He blames you and Daniel," Eleanor told Sarah, her voice breaking slightly. "Says you've been plotting against him, turning Michael against him too." "That's not true, Mom," Sarah protested. "Michael came to us because he's worried about the company. Daniel only provided information." "I know that, sweetheart, but your father. He sees this as a personal attack, not a business decision." "Nati, the situation escalated when the formal request for proposals for the digital assessment was issued. As Michael had predicted, Carter Digital was one of 3 firms invited to bid. The others were reputable digital transformation consultancies, but neither had our specific experience with manufacturing clients. Richard, having returned from his self-imposed exile at the lake house, immediately tried to cancel the RFP process. The board, in a rare show of unified opposition, refused. According to Michael, the confrontation had been ugly, with Richard accusing the board of orchestrating a coup and threatening to resign. Whitaker called his bluff, Michael reported, told him the board was acting in the company's best interests and would accept his resignation if that was his choice. Richard had stormed out of the meeting but hadn't actually resigned, a telling indication of his emotional attachment to Bennett Manufacturing despite his rage. Carter Digital submitted our proposal for the digital assessment, as did the other 2 firms. I recused myself from the process entirely, assigning my best manufacturing specialists to develop the proposal and potentially lead the project if we were selected. It was a futile gesture in Richard's eyes, I knew, but it felt important to maintain professional boundaries given the charged family dynamics. The board's decision came 2 weeks later. Carter Digital was selected unanimously based on our detailed understanding of manufacturing environments and our proven methodology for digital transformation in traditional industries. We would begin the assessment the following Monday. The night before our team was scheduled to arrive at Bennett Manufacturing, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Daniel Carter. There was a moment of silence, then a voice I immediately recognized despite having heard it infrequently in recent months. "This is Richard Bennett." My pulse quickened. "Hello, Richard." "I'm going to be brief," he said, his tone coldly formal. "The board has made their decision against my recommendation. Your company will be conducting this assessment of Bennett Manufacturing." The way he said assessment made it sound like an obscenity. "That's correct," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I want to make something perfectly clear. This is a business arrangement forced upon me by a misguided board. It changes nothing between us personally. You've manipulated my son into undermining my authority at my own company, and I won't forget that." The accusation stung, particularly because it was so far from the truth. "Michael came to me, Richard, not the other way around. He's concerned about Bennett Manufacturing's future, as is the board. Bennett Manufacturing was succeeding for decades before you came along with your digital disruption nonsense," he snapped. "We've weathered challenges before, and we would have weathered this one too, without undermining everything I've built." I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Richard was speaking from a place of fear and wounded pride. "The assessment will provide data and recommendations, Richard, nothing more. What Bennett Manufacturing does with that information will be up to the board and the executive team, including you." "Save your diplomatic corporate speak," he replied dismissively. "We both know what this is. You've been waiting for an opportunity to prove me wrong about your digital marketing schemes, and now you think you've found it. I'm not interested in your denials," he interrupted. "I'm calling as a professional courtesy to inform you that while I cannot prevent this assessment from taking place, I will not be participating in it personally. My executive team has been instructed to provide the minimum required information and access, nothing more. It was a direct threat to hamstring the assessment before it even began, a self-defeating move that would only damage Bennett Manufacturing further. But Richard's pride was clearly more important to him than the company's well-being at this point. "That approach will only hurt Bennett Manufacturing," I said quietly. "The more complete the assessment, the more valuable the recommendations will be. I've run this company successfully for nearly 30 years without digital consultants telling me how to do my job. I don't need lectures from my son-in-law, who's been riding digital trends for a decade. His voice was bitter. Your team can have their access, collect their fee, write their report, but don't expect me to embrace it. With that, he hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in frustration. I had expected resistance, even hostility, but Richard's determination to actively undermine the assessment process was worse than I'd anticipated. It wasn't just about his dislike of me or his dismissal of digital transformation anymore. He was willing to damage his own company rather than admit he might be wrong. I called Michael immediately to warn him about Richard's stance. He sighed heavily. I was afraid of this. Dad's pride has always been his blind spot. I'll talk to the executive team tomorrow morning before your people arrive. Make sure they understand that the board has authorized full cooperation regardless of Dad's instructions. Will they listen to you over Richard? Some will, some won't. Michael's voice was tired. This company has operated on fear of Richard Bennett for too long. That's part of the problem we're trying to solve. The assessment began the following day in this atmosphere of tension and divided loyalties. Some of Bennett's executives were openly cooperative, embracing the opportunity to finally address the technological deficiencies they'd been concerned about for years. Others were coldly professional, providing bare minimum information while clearly waiting to see which way the political winds would ultimately blow. Richard himself was conspicuously absent, having arranged an urgent client visit that would keep him away from the headquarters during the initial phase of the assessment. It was a transparent attempt to distance himself from a process he couldn't stop but refused to endorse. As the assessment progressed over the following weeks, the results confirmed what Michael and the board had already suspected. Bennett Manufacturing systems were woefully outdated, its processes inefficient, its data siloed and often contradictory. The company was losing ground not because its products were inferior, but because its operations were analog in a digital world. What we hadn't fully anticipated was the extent of the company's financial vulnerability. Access to the complete financial records, granted by the board over Richard's objections, revealed a company burning through its cash reserves at an alarming rate. Bennett Manufacturing wasn't just falling behind its competitors, it was hurtling toward a financial crisis. The assessment team leader, Jessica Martinez, called me into an emergency meeting 3 weeks into the process. "We have a serious problem," she said without preamble, spreading financial documents across the conference table. "Bennett's cash position is much worse than they've been reporting publicly. At the current burn rate, they'll be unable to meet payroll in 4 to 6 months. "That can't be right," I said, scanning the figures. "Bennett Manufacturing has been profitable for decades. How could they be this close to insolvency?" "3 factors," Jessica replied crisply. "First, they've been losing major clients faster than they've been replacing them. Second, their operational inefficiencies are causing cost overruns on almost every project. Third, and most concerning, they've been drawing down their cash reserves to maintain the appearance of stability." Does the board know this? Based on our conversations with individual board members, no. They know things are challenging, but Richard has been presenting a much more optimistic financial picture in his reports. This wasn't just mismanagement, it bordered on deception. Richard had been hiding the true extent of Bennett's financial troubles from the board, while simultaneously blocking the very initiatives that might have helped address them. "We need to notify the board immediately," I said. "This changes everything about our recommendations and timeline." Jessica nodded. "I've already requested an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. The full assessment wasn't due for another 3 weeks, but this can't wait." As I drove home that evening, my mind raced with the implications. Bennett Manufacturing wasn't just in need of digital transformation. It was fighting for survival. The company that had supported 3 generations of Bennetts, that employed hundreds of people, that Richard had devoted his life to building, was on the verge of collapse, largely due to his own stubborn refusal to adapt. The irony was painful. Richard's determination to protect his company from change was the very thing destroying it. And now I found myself in the unenviable position of being the messenger who would have to deliver this devastating news to a board and a family wholly unprepared for just how dire the situation had become. The emergency board meeting was held in a downtown law firm's conference room rather than at Bennett Manufacturing headquarters, a deliberate choice to ensure Richard couldn't disrupt the proceedings. All 9 board members were present, their expressions grave as Jessica Martinez methodically walked them through our findings. Based on the financial records we've analyzed, Bennett Manufacturing has approximately 4 to 6 months of operational runway before facing a severe cash crisis, she concluded. The company's reported profitability has masked a rapidly deteriorating cash position and accelerating client losses. Thomas Whitaker, the board chairman, looked physically ill. How is this possible? The quarterly reports Richard has presented showed challenges, but nothing this dire. Jessica displayed a slide comparing the official reports to the actual financial data. The discrepancies are significant. Revenue projections were consistently overstated, client retention was exaggerated, and operational costs were understated. Alicia Chen, the tech CEO, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting deliberate misrepresentation?" "We can't speak to intent," Jessica replied diplomatically, "but the pattern is consistent and systematic." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Richard Bennett, the company's trusted CEO for nearly 3 decades, had been hiding the true extent of Bennett Manufacturing's decline from the very people responsible for its governance. James Hoffman, who had been skeptical of the digital assessment initially, spoke first. "What are our options at this point?" Jessica looked to me, and I nodded slightly, stepping forward. Bennett Manufacturing needs immediate intervention on 3 fronts. First, emergency financial controls to stop the cash bleed. Second, a targeted digital transformation focusing on the highest value client retention opportunities. Third, transparent communication with key clients to prevent further defections. "No. What's the timeline for implementation?" Whitaker asked. "The financial controls should be implemented immediately, this week. The targeted digital transformation would take approximately 6 to 8 weeks for Phase 1, focusing on the client-facing systems that will have the most immediate impact on retention and revenue. Subsequent phases would address internal operations and efficiency. And the cost? Hoffman again, his voice tight. The emergency program would require an investment of approximately $800,000, substantially less than the full transformation originally proposed. This would cover the critical client-facing systems and essential operational improvements. Chen frowned. That's still a significant investment for a company in Bennett's financial position. It is, I acknowledged. But without these changes, the company will continue losing clients to more technologically advanced competitors. The cash position will only deteriorate further. Whitaker exchanged glances with several other board members, some sort of unspoken communication passing between them. "We need to discuss this privately," he said finally. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Martinez, if you could give us the room." In the hallway outside, Jessica paced nervously. "They have to approve it. There's no other viable option at this point." I wasn't so certain. They might decide to start shopping the company to potential buyers instead, cut their losses. In this condition, who would buy a manufacturing company with outdated systems and a dwindling client base? A competitor looking to absorb their remaining clients and specialized equipment, I replied. It happens all the time in consolidating industries. The company sells for a fraction of its former value. The acquiring firm cherry-picks the assets and clients, and the brand disappears. After nearly an hour, Whitaker opened the door and invited us back in. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The shock had given way to grim determination. "The board has made several decisions," Whitaker began without preamble. "First, we are approving the Emergency Digital Transformation Program as outlined in your presentation. Second, we are implementing immediate financial oversight measures that will require all expenditures above $10,000 to receive board approval. Third, we are—" He hesitated. "Initiating a leadership change at Bennett Manufacturing." My pulse quickened. "You're removing Richard as CEO." Whitaker nodded slowly. "Effective immediately. We've already dispatched our corporate counsel to the Bennett headquarters to inform him and escort him from the premises if necessary." His expression was pained. "This gives me no pleasure. Richard has been a friend and colleague for 30 years, but his actions, hiding the company's true financial condition while blocking necessary modernization, have left us no choice." "Who will lead the company during this transition?" Jessica asked. "The board has appointed Michael Bennett as interim CEO," Whitaker replied. "He understands both the company's traditional strengths and the urgent need for digital transformation. And as a Bennett, his appointment maintains the family leadership that has been central to the company's identity. It was a smart move, leveraging the Bennett name while installing leadership that recognized the need for change. But I could only imagine Richard's reaction to being ousted and replaced by his own son. "There's one more thing," Whitaker continued, his gaze fixing on me. "The board would like Carter Digital to lead the emergency transformation program. Your firm already understands Bennett's systems and challenges, and time is of the essence. However, given the personal complications, we would understand if you preferred to recommend another firm." The personal complications were profound. Taking this project would cement Richard's belief that I had orchestrated his downfall, that I had manipulated his son and the board to seize control of his company. The family rift, already serious, would become potentially unbridgeable. But Bennett Manufacturing employed hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival. Those people had done nothing wrong, had no part in Richard's stubborn refusal to adapt. They deserved the best chance at keeping their jobs. "Carter Digital will lead the transformation program," I said finally. "I'll remove myself personally from the project to minimize any appearance of conflict. But our team is uniquely positioned to execute this emergency plan effectively." Whitaker nodded gratefully. "Thank you. We recognize the difficult position. This places you in personally." As the meeting concluded, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad just called Mom in a rage. Said he's been betrayed by everyone." "What's happening?" I texted back. "Board found out about company's true financial situation, removed Richard as CEO, appointed Michael as interim replacement. Call you in 20 min with details." Her response was immediate. "Oh God, coming home now." The next 48 hours were chaotic. Richard refused to accept his removal, attempting to countermand the board's decision by issuing a company-wide memo declaring the board's action an illegal coup and instructing employees to disregard any directives from the so-called interim CEO. Our corporate security had to physically escort him from the building when he arrived the following morning, an event witnessed by dozens of shocked employees. Michael, thrust suddenly into a leadership role for which he had the vision, but not the experience, was overwhelmed. He called me that evening, his voice strained almost beyond recognition. "The executive team is divided. Half support the board's decision, half are loyal to Dad. The employees are confused and frightened. And the financials are even worse than your assessment showed. We're going to struggle to make next month's payroll unless we secure emergency financing." "Where's Richard now?" I asked. "At home, apparently consulting with his personal attorneys, but suing the board, the company, possibly me personally." Michael's laugh was hollow. "Mum's devastated. She doesn't understand why this had to happen, why Dad and I couldn't work together on modernizing the company. Because Richard refused to acknowledge there was a problem until it was almost—" "Too late," I said gently. "That's not your fault, Michael." "Maybe not, but I'm the one who set all this in motion. If I hadn't gone to the board, then Bennett Manufacturing would have continued its decline until collapse was inevitable," I finished for him. "You gave the company a fighting chance." Sarah was waiting when I got home, her expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "I just got off the phone with Mom," she said. "Dad's telling everyone that you masterminded his removal, that you manipulated Michael and the board to take over Bennett Manufacturing." I sighed heavily, unsurprised but still disappointed. "The board removed Richard because he hid the company's true financial condition while blocking necessary changes. Carter Digital's assessment just brought the facts to light." "I know that," Sarah said. "Michael knows that. Even Mom probably knows that deep down. But Dad will never acknowledge his own role in what's happened. He needs someone to blame. And you're the perfect target, the outsider who never respected the traditional way of doing business." She was right, of course. In Richard's narrative, he was the victim of a tech-obsessed son-in-law who had never understood or respected the manufacturing industry. No amount of evidence would change that perspective. "How bad is it?" Sarah asked. "The company, I mean." "Bad," I admitted. "Without immediate changes and probably emergency financing, Bennett Manufacturing might not survive 6 months." She closed her eyes briefly. "All those people who've worked there for decades, the families that depend on those jobs, Dad's legacy, Grandpa Bennett's legacy." "It's not over yet," I said, taking her hand. "Michael is committed to saving the company. The board is acting decisively, and Carter Digital's team is already implementing the emergency transformation plan, without you personally involved. It's better that way. My direct involvement would only inflame the situation with Richard further." Sarah nodded slowly. "This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it?" I couldn't lie to her. Probably. Richard isn't going to accept this quietly. But eventually, if the transformation program works, if Bennett Manufacturing survives and thrives again, maybe he'll come to terms with the necessity of what's happened. I wanted to believe that was possible, but I had my doubts. Richard Bennett had spent decades building Bennett Manufacturing in his image, being forced out of his own company, replaced by his son, with changes implemented by his son-in-law's firm. It was a perfect storm of humiliation from his perspective. Some wounds might be too deep to heal. The emergency transformation program proceeded at breakneck speed. Carter Digital's team worked around the clock to implement the most critical digital systems, an online client portal, inventory management, software integrated with production scheduling, automated quality control reporting. Meanwhile, Michael and the board secured emergency financing from a consortium of local banks, buying the company precious months of operational runway. Richard, true to form, launched legal challenges to his removal as CEO. The lawsuits cited procedural technicalities in the board's action and alleged a conspiracy to undermine and seize control of a family business. The legal maneuvers created headlines in business publications but gained little traction in court, as the board had meticulously documented both the company's true financial condition and Richard's misrepresentations to shareholders. The family dynamics were painful. Eleanor found herself caught between her husband and her children, trying desperately to mediate a conflict that had no middle ground. Sunday family dinners became a thing of the past. Holidays loomed as potential battlegrounds. Richard refused to be in the same room as Michael or me, which made any family gathering impossible. Through it all, Bennett Manufacturing fought for survival. The digital systems came online one by one, enabling more efficient operations and providing clients with the modern interfaces they had been demanding for years. The sales team, armed with these new capabilities, managed to win back a few recently. Lost accounts. Cash flow improved marginally, though the company remained in a precarious position. 3 months into the transformation, Michael called with unexpected news. Omega Partners reached out. They're interested in acquiring Bennett Manufacturing. Omega Partners was a private equity firm known for buying distressed manufacturing companies, extracting whatever value remained, and then dismantling them. It was exactly the fate we had been working to avoid. "What's the board saying?" I asked. "They're considering it," Michael replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "The emergency financing is running out. The transformation program is showing positive results, but not quickly enough to secure the company's long-term viability without additional capital." "What's the offer?" "Lowball, about 20 cents on the dollar of our pre-crisis valuation. But it would at least provide some return to shareholders and a structured wind-down rather than bankruptcy." I thought about the employees who had been with Bennett for decades, the specialized skills that might disappear if the company was dismantled, the Bennett family legacy reduced to a footnote in Chicago's manufacturing history. "What if there was another option?" I asked slowly, an idea forming that I had barely acknowledged even to myself until that moment. "Like what?" "An investment group that would recapitalize the company, complete the digital transformation, but keep the Bennett name and core operations intact. Preserve as many jobs as possible." Michael was silent for a moment. "That would be ideal, but who would?" "Wait. Are you thinking about putting together an offer?" I took a deep breath. "I might be. Carter Digital has been approached by venture capital firms interested in our manufacturing transformation expertise. We've been considering establishing a separate division specifically for manufacturing clients. Acquiring Bennett would give us an established manufacturing platform with equipment, expertise, and client relationships." "Daniel, I don't even know what to say after everything that's happened with Dad." "This wouldn't be about Richard," I said firmly. "It would be a business decision based on Bennett Manufacturing's potential value once fully modernized. The company has good bones, skilled workforce, specialized equipment, strong reputation for quality. With proper digital integration and modern management, it could thrive again." "Dad would see it as the ultimate takeover," Michael warned. "His son-in-law buying his company out from under him." "I know, but the alternative is Omega Partners dismantling the company entirely. At least this way, Bennett Manufacturing would continue to exist in some form. Jobs would be preserved. The family name would remain on the building." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "I need to think about this. Talk to Lisa. If you're serious, draw up a preliminary proposal, and I'll present it to the board alongside the Omega offer." That night, I discussed the idea with Sarah. Her initial reaction was concern. Buying Dad's company, he'd never forgive us. "He's not going to forgive us anyway," I pointed out gently. "At least this way, something of Bennett Manufacturing survives. The employees keep their jobs. Your grandfather's legacy continues in some form." She considered this, her expression thoughtful. "You really think you could turn it around?" "With the right investment and completed digital transformation? Yes, the core business is sound. It's the outdated systems and management approach that created the crisis." Sarah walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline glittering in the distance. It's ironic, isn't it? Dad spent years dismissing your career, your expertise in digital transformation. Now that expertise might be the only thing that can save his company. Not just my expertise. Carter Digital's team, our investors, our proven methodology, and it would need to make business sense. I can't justify an acquisition based on family considerations alone. She turned back to me, her decision made. Do it. Put together the offer. If the board accepts it, at least Bennett Manufacturing will survive, even if Dad never understands why this was necessary. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Carter Digital's executive team and our financial advisors to develop a formal acquisition proposal. We would form a new entity, Bennett Digital Manufacturing, backed by a combination of Carter Digital's resources and investment from our venture capital partners. The proposal included retaining at least 80% of the current workforce, maintaining the Bennett name, and completing the digital transformation program already underway. Our offer, while still reflecting Bennett's distressed condition, was substantially better than Omega Partners' proposal, closer to 40 cents on the dollar of pre-crisis valuation rather than 20. More importantly, it promised continuity rather than dismantlement. Michael presented both offers to the board at their next meeting. I deliberately stayed away, not wanting my presence to influence the decision. 3 hours later, he called. "They're going with your offer," he said, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. It was unanimous. Even James Hoffman, who's been friends with Dad for 30 years, voted in favor, said he'd rather see Bennett transformed than dismantled. "What about you?" I asked. "How do you feel about this?" Michael hesitated. "Honestly, conflicted. I believe your offer is best for the company, the employees, our family's legacy, but I know what this will do to Dad. To him, this will feel like the final betrayal, his son-in-law taking over his life's work." "I understand," I said. "If you'd prefer to distance yourself from this, no one would blame you." "No," he replied firmly. "I started this process because I believed Bennett Manufacturing needed to change to survive. I'm not backing away now, regardless of the personal cost." His courage impressed me. Michael had always lived in Richard's shadow, been the dutiful son following the path laid out for him. Now he was standing his ground, despite knowing the family conflict it would create. "What about your role going forward?" I asked. "The acquisition will involve leadership changes, but we value your understanding of the company and the industry." "Let's be practical," Michael said. "If I stayed at Bennett after you acquire it, Dad would see me as a collaborator in his downfall. It would make the family situation even worse if that's possible. I think it's better if I make a clean break. Find a position elsewhere." I hadn't expected that response, but I respected his reasoning. "If that's what you think is best, you know there would always be a place for you if you changed your mind." "I appreciate that. Right now, I need to call Mom and give her a heads up before the board's decision becomes public. She deserves to hear this from family first." The news of Carter Digital's acquisition of Bennett Manufacturing broke the following day. The business press framed it positively. A digital innovator, saving a traditional manufacturer, preserving jobs and a historic Chicago brand while modernizing operations for the 21st century. The headline in the Chicago Tribune business section read, "Digital Transformation in Action, Carter Digital Acquires Bennett Manufacturing, Pledges to Preserve Jobs and Legacy." Richard's reaction was swift and incendiary. Through his personal attorney, he issued a statement calling the acquisition a calculated takeover orchestrated by opportunists exploiting a temporary downturn. He vowed to pursue all legal avenues to challenge this illegitimate transaction. The statement made no mention of the company's near insolvency or his own role in hiding Bennett's true financial condition from the board. The legal challenges materialized as promised, but they gained little traction. The board had followed proper procedures, considered multiple offers, and accepted the one that provided the best value for shareholders and stakeholders. The courts consistently ruled against Richard's claims, though each ruling seemed to fuel his determination to fight on rather than accept the new reality. Throughout this turbulent period, I maintained my personal distance from Bennett Manufacturing's operations, focusing instead on the strategic integration of the company into our broader business, while our transformation team continued the modernization work. It was a delicate balance, being involved enough to ensure the acquisition succeeded while staying removed enough to avoid inflaming the family situation further. That balance became increasingly difficult to maintain as the acquisition progressed from announcement to closing to integration. As the legal owner of what had been Bennett Manufacturing, I eventually needed to be physically present at the facility, to meet with employees, to make key decisions about the company's future. The first time I walked through the manufacturing floor as the new owner was surreal. Many of the employees had been there for decades, had known Richard personally, had watched Michael grow up visiting his father's company. Their expressions ranged from cautious optimism to undisguised suspicion. I knew the rumors Richard had spread about me, that I was a tech opportunist who had engineered his downfall, that I understood nothing about manufacturing, that I would eventually dismantle the company despite my promises to preserve it. In a town hall meeting with all employees, I addressed these concerns directly. I know many of you have heard different versions of how this acquisition came about and what it means for Bennett Manufacturing's future, I began. So let me be clear about three things. First, this company was on the verge of bankruptcy before Carter Digital's assessment revealed the true financial situation. That's not an opinion, it's documented fact. Second, our acquisition saved Bennett Manufacturing from being dismantled by a private equity firm that had no interest in preserving jobs or continuing operations. Third, and most importantly, we are fully committed to maintaining and growing this company, preserving its legacy of quality while modernizing its operations to compete in today's market. I continued, outlining our plans for completing the digital transformation, the investments we were making in new equipment and training, and our commitment to keeping the Bennett name and manufacturing operation in Chicago. I acknowledged the uncertainty and anxiety the employees must be feeling, but asked for their patience and cooperation as we worked to secure their future. The response was cautiously positive. Most of the employees had been aware of the company's struggles, had seen clients defect to competitors with more advanced capabilities, had worried about their job security long before the crisis became public. The prospect of stability and continued employment, even under new ownership, was preferable to the alternative they had feared. Over the following months, Bennett Digital Manufacturing began to stabilize and then strengthen. The completed digital transformation enabled more efficient operations, better client service, and new capabilities that attracted business from companies that had previously dismissed Bennett as too traditional. We rehired some recently laid-off employees and even began cautious expansion in certain areas. 6 months after the acquisition, we held an open house at the renovated facility, inviting clients, suppliers, industry partners, and local officials to see the transformed operation. The manufacturing floor now featured digital monitoring stations alongside the traditional equipment. The client showroom had interactive displays demonstrating our digital integration capabilities. The employee break rooms had been modernized and expanded, a small but meaningful indication of our investment in the workforce. The event was covered by local business media and attended by Thomas Whitaker and several other former board members, all of whom expressed approval of the changes and relief that Bennett had survived when its demise had seemed almost certain. Michael attended briefly, Though he kept a low profile, still uncomfortable with his position between his father and the company's new reality. One person noticeably absent was Richard. He had been invited as a courtesy. It was, after all, still the company he had led for decades, still bore his family name, but he had not responded. According to Eleanor, who maintained cautious contact with Sarah despite Richard's opposition, he had dismissed the invitation as an insult and a publicity stunt. As the open house concluded and the last guest departed, I walked alone through the quiet manufacturing floor. The machines were silent now, but they would roar to life again in the morning, operated by the same skilled workers who had kept Bennett Manufacturing going through years of technological stagnation and mismanagement. The Bennett name still adorned the building, the products, the legacy that 3 generations had built. It wasn't how I had imagined entering the manufacturing industry, acquiring my father-in-law's company after years of his dismissal and contempt for my career. The personal cost had been enormous. Family gatherings were fractured. Richard refused to be in the same room as Sarah or me. Michael was caught in an impossible position, torn between loyalty to his father and recognition of the necessary changes that had saved the company. But professionally, the acquisition had been the right decision. Bennett Digital Manufacturing was emerging as a case study in successful digital transformation of a traditional industry. The employees had job security they had feared was lost. The clients received the modernized services they had been demanding. The Bennett Manufacturing legacy continued, albeit in a form Richard couldn't, or wouldn't, recognize. As I stood there on the manufacturing floor that had once been Richard's domain and was now mine, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a quiet confirmation that expertise and adaptability would always eventually prevail over stubborn adherence to outdated methods. The world changed whether you embraced that change or resisted it. The only choice was whether you changed with it or were left behind. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "Dinner with Michael and Lisa tonight?" "They have." "News," I replied. "Absolutely." 7 p.m. at our place? Her response came quickly. "Perfect. They seem happy about whatever it is. Nice to have some good news for a change." I smiled slightly as I walked toward the exit. Despite everything, life moved forward. Families adapted, even when fractured. New opportunities emerged from disruption. Michael, at least, appeared to be finding his way to a new chapter beyond the shadow of Bennett Manufacturing and his father's expectations. As I reached my car in what had once been Richard's reserved parking space, I glanced back at the building. The new company sign gleamed in the afternoon sun. Bennett Digital Manufacturing. The name acknowledged both the heritage and the transformation, a bridge between past and future. If only Richard could have seen that bridge as an evolution, rather than a betrayal. How different things might have been for all of us. 1 year after the acquisition, Bennett Digital Manufacturing had exceeded even my optimistic projections. The completed digital transformation had reduced production costs by 22%, improved order fulfillment times by 35%, and enabled us to recapture several major clients who had defected during Bennett's decline. The workforce had grown from the post-crisis low of 120 employees to nearly 200, with new positions in data analytics, digital systems management, and advanced manufacturing techniques. Michael had found his footing outside the family business, accepting a position with a manufacturing industry association focused on helping traditional manufacturers navigate digital transformation. His experience with Bennett's tumultuous transition made him uniquely qualified for this role, and he seemed genuinely happier away from the shadow of his father's expectations. Sarah and I had settled into a new normal regarding family relationships. We saw Eleanor regularly, usually meeting for lunch in the city, carefully avoiding mentions of Bennett Manufacturing or Richard's ongoing legal battles. She maintained a delicate balance, loving her husband while acknowledging privately that his stubborn refusal to adapt had nearly destroyed the company. Richard himself remained estranged, refusing all contact with either of us despite Eleanor's gentle attempts at reconciliation. The call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning. I was in my office at Carter Digital's headquarters, reviewing quarterly reports from our various divisions, including Bennett Manufacturing. The caller ID displayed Eleanor's number. "Eleanor, is everything okay?" I asked, immediately concerned. She rarely called during business hours. "Daniel." Her voice was strained. "Richard's had a heart attack. He's at Northwestern Memorial. It's serious." My breath caught. Despite everything that had happened, Richard was still Sarah's father, still my children's grandfather. "I'm so sorry. How is he doing?" "The doctors are cautiously optimistic, but he'll need bypass surgery tomorrow." She paused. "He asked for you." That surprised me into momentary silence. "For me, are you sure?" "Yes, he was very specific. He wants to see you alone before the surgery." Her voice wavered. "I think he's frightened, Daniel. Facing his mortality has shifted something in him." "Of course I'll come." "When?" "This evening, if possible. The surgery is scheduled for early tomorrow morning." I called Sarah immediately after hanging up, sharing the news about Richard's condition and his unexpected request to see me. "He asked for you specifically." Sarah echoed my surprise. "Not Michael, not me." "According to your mother, yes. She thinks the heart attack has given him some perspective." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Be careful, Daniel. Even facing surgery, Dad might just want one more opportunity to berate you for stealing his company." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but I have to go. If there's any chance of healing this rift, even slightly, we should take it." Northwestern Memorial Hospital's cardiac wing was hushed when I arrived that evening, visiting hours winding down. Eleanor met me in the waiting area, her face drawn with worry. "Thank you for coming," she said, embracing me briefly. "He's been asking when you'd arrive." She led me to Richard's room, squeezing my arm encouragingly before leaving me at the threshold. I took a deep breath and entered. Richard Bennett looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, monitoring equipment beeping softly beside him. His once commanding presence was muted, his complexion grey, his breathing laboured, yet his eyes, when they found mine, still held that piercing quality I remembered. "Daniel," he said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You came." "Of course," I replied, taking the chair beside his bed. "Eleanor said you wanted to see me." Richard nodded slightly, adjusting the oxygen tube at his nose. "Nothing like staring down your own mortality to provide some clarity." He attempted a wry smile that didn't quite materialize. "The doctors give me good odds, but still, facing bypass surgery makes a man reflective." I waited, unsure where this conversation was heading. "I've spent the past year consumed with anger," Richard continued. "At the board, at Michael, at you especially. Convinced myself that all of you had conspired to take what was mine, that you'd orchestrated my downfall to prove your digital theories correct." He paused, his breathing slightly labored. "It was easier than facing the alternative." "The alternative?" I prompted gently. "That I was wrong, that I failed to adapt, that my stubborn refusal to embrace necessary change nearly destroyed everything my father and grandfather built." His gaze met mine directly. "That my son-in-law understood the future of manufacturing better than I did after 30 years in the industry." The admission stunned me into silence. This was the last thing I had expected from Richard Bennett, whose pride had seemed unassailable. "I visited the factory last week," he continued, "parked across the street watching employees come and go. More of them than before the crisis. Young people alongside veterans, the parking lot full, the loading docks busy. He shook his head slightly. Bennett Manufacturing is thriving under your leadership. I can't deny that reality anymore, even if I wanted to. It's still your legacy, Richard, I said. We kept the Bennett name for a reason. The quality standards, the commitment to craftsmanship. We built the digital transformation around those core values, not in place of them. He absorbed this, a complexity of emotions crossing his face. I've been so afraid of change that I couldn't see how it might strengthen rather than destroy what mattered. His hand moved restlessly on the blanket. I drove out to the lake last weekend, sat by the water for hours thinking about legacy, about what really matters when you're facing your own mortality. I recognized the location, the same lake where Sarah had mentioned Richard would go to think through difficult decisions throughout his career. I realized something, he continued. A true legacy isn't about maintaining control or doing things exactly the same way forever. It's about creating something valuable enough that others want to carry it forward, even if they do it differently than you would have. He met my eyes again. You didn't destroy Bennett Manufacturing, Daniel. You transformed it, saved it, when my way would have led to its extinction. The admission seemed to physically cost him, his breathing becoming more labored. I reached for the water cup on his bedside table, helping him take a sip. Thank you, he said, recovering slightly. The doctors say I need to stay calm before surgery, but I needed to say this to you directly. I was wrong about digital transformation, wrong about your business, wrong about you. Richard, you don't need to... He raised a hand to stop me. I do need to. Pride has cost me too much already. My company, my relationship with my children, a year of bitterness that I can never get back. He took a shallow breath. I don't expect one conversation to heal everything, but I wanted you to know that I recognize what you've accomplished, and that I'm sorry for the contempt I showed toward your career and choices. Those words, I'm sorry, had never before passed Richard Bennett's lips in my presence. The heart attack had indeed brought about a profound shift in his perspective. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. And for what it's worth, I never set out to prove you wrong or take over Bennett Manufacturing. The acquisition was about preserving jobs and a family legacy worth saving. He nodded slowly. I believe that now. His gaze drifted toward the window where Chicago's lights glimmered in the evening darkness. If I make it through this surgery, you will, I interjected. A faint smile touched his lips. When I make it through this surgery, he amended, I'd like to visit the factory properly. See these digital systems in action. Understand what you've built on the foundation my family created. I'd be happy to show you, I replied, genuinely meaning it. And perhaps, he added hesitantly, we could work toward mending the family rifts I've caused. Sarah, Michael, my stubbornness has cost us all too much time together. I think they'd both welcome that, I said. Family has always been important to Sarah. This estrangement has been painful for her. Richard's eyes grew heavy, the medication and his condition clearly taking a toll. I should rest before tomorrow, he said. But thank you for coming, Daniel, for hearing an old man acknowledge he was wrong. Get some rest, I said, standing. We'll talk more after your recovery. As I turned to leave, Richard spoke once more, his voice fading. One last thing, Daniel. That corner office on the top floor. Does it still have the view of the lake? It does, I confirmed, recognizing the reference to his former CEO office. Good, he murmured, eyes closing. Some things should remain unchanged. Richard's surgery the following day was successful, though his recovery would be lengthy. Sarah and I visited him regularly, bringing photos of Bennett Digital Manufacturing's operations and updates on new clients and innovations. True to his word, once he was physically able, Richard asked for a tour of the transformed factory. Walking the manufacturing floor with Richard was a surreal experience. Employees who had known him for decades approached cautiously at first, then with growing warmth as they realized he wasn't there to criticize or reclaim, but to understand and reconcile. He asked thoughtful questions about the digital systems, nodding with genuine interest as I explained how data analytics had improved production efficiency and quality control. "I see it now," he said, as we concluded the tour in what had once been his office, and was now a modern conference room with digital displays alongside classic photos of Bennett's history. The integration of digital tools with traditional craftsmanship, it's not replacement, it's evolution. "That's exactly right," I agreed. "The human expertise is still central. The digital systems just enhance it, make it more efficient, more responsive to client needs." Richard nodded slowly, gazing at a photograph of his father standing proudly before the original Bennett Manufacturing building. "He would have adapted too, I think. My father. He was always more pragmatic than sentimental." "Unlike his son?" I ventured carefully. A small smile crossed Richard's face. "Unlike his stubborn, prideful son, who confused resistance to change with loyalty to tradition." He turned to face me fully. "The heart attack was a wake-up call in more ways than one, Daniel. Life is too short for grudges, especially misguided ones." The reconciliation that began that day extended gradually to the wider family. Sunday dinners resumed, now alternating between our home and Richard and Eleanor's. Michael and his family joined when they could. The conversation sometimes still grew tense when business topics arose, but Richard made a visible effort to listen, rather than dismiss, to understand, rather than judge. At one such dinner, nearly 2 years after the acquisition, Richard raised his glass in a toast. "To Bennett Digital Manufacturing," he said, surprising everyone at the table, "and to my son-in-law, who saw the future more clearly than I did." The gesture wasn't just about business, it was an acknowledgement of growth, of lessons learned through difficult experiences. Richard had finally recognized that true strength lay not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in the wisdom to adapt while preserving what truly mattered. As our families sat together that evening, the tension of past conflicts giving way to cautious harmony, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Richard's dismissal of my career had indeed been painful, his belittling comments over the years a constant test of my patience and self-confidence. Yet ironically, his resistance had pushed me to excel, to prove my value in an industry he deemed frivolous, ultimately leading to the acquisition that saved his family's legacy. Some lessons come at great cost, through conflict and near disaster, rather than smooth transitions. But perhaps those are the lessons that transform us most profoundly, the ones that challenge our deepest assumptions and force us to recognize our own fallibility. Richard Bennett had learned such a lesson, and in doing so had found the humility to rebuild relationships he had nearly destroyed. As Richard joined Michael in a conversation about manufacturing trends, animated in a way I hadn't seen since before the crisis, I caught Sarah's eye across the table. Her smile reflected my own thoughts. The road had been difficult, even devastating at times, but we had arrived somewhere better than where we began. Not through vindication or triumph, but through the harder, more meaningful work of reconciliation and growth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.